Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 7:30 and we'll begin. I want to welcome everyone to the HST Public Forum in Kamloops. I'm Christopher Sagan. I'm the VP Advancement here at Thompson Rivers University. It's an honor and a pleasure for this institution to be a host for this event. Universities and campuses are where controversy and thought come to be born, grow, and flourish, and tonight will be no exception. This forum is a part of a series of 11 public sessions being held in 10 BC communities before the HST referendum. We are here as a result of the Public Dialogue Fund, created by the Government of BC. This fund is independently administered by BC's universities, colleges, and institutes. 3 associations representing BC's post-secondary institutions are responsible for organizing the forums. They are the BC Colleges, the BC Association of Institutes and Universities, the Research University Council of BC, and us, Thompson Rivers University. Our goal here tonight, and at all of the HST public forums, is to hold informative public dialogues before British Columbians vote in the referendum. This forum is organized in an impartial way. I'm here to facilitate the discussion, to ensure the speakers have the chance to present their views equally, and that the audience members have the opportunity to participate in the dialogue and ask questions. Representatives from the 2 groups that have been successful in their request for public funding to advance their views about the referendum will be speaking at this forum. The 2 official sides are the Fight HST Society, the Yes side, supporting a referendum vote to return to the PST-GST, and the Smart Tax Alliance, the No side, supporting a referendum vote to retain the HST. We are here to provide a platform of discussion and encourage the dialogue so British Columbians make an informed decision in the HST referendum. This institution takes no sides. I'm here to moderate the proceedings in a non-partisan way. I think this is the first time in my life that I have no opinion. On my left, we have Bill Vanderzam and Chris Delaney. And on my right, we have Dave Robertson, Sue Porter, and Judy Gouchon. Each side will make a presentation of 10 minutes. Following the initial presentations, each side will provide a rebuttal lasting 5 minutes, and then we will proceed to questions from the audience here and from our online audience. I invite you to address your questions to one of the presenters. The other side will then have the ability for a short rebuttal. If you do not want to ask your question at the microphone, you can write your questions on the sheets of paper that will be provided for you throughout the evening. We will collect them throughout the evening and read some of them out. And we have some questions that were submitted online before this forum. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that this forum can be seen on the internet at www.htpublicforums.ca, no spaces. They've also told me to tell you to turn your cell phones and palm devices to vibrate. And this is a first. They've said to encourage you to keep them on and to tweet your views. I'm not a tweeter myself, so go to it. The last piece of housekeeping are the washrooms are located on the bottom floor of the clock tower. So if you go out and down, they're on the bottom floor, and emergency exits are in the fore and the back. I've always kind of wanted to do that too. So let's get started. The order of tonight's presentations was done by a flip of the coin. Each side will make their presentation. There will be a rebuttal from each side, and then questions throughout the evening. So the Fight HST side is up first, followed by the Smart Tax Alliance. You have the floor.
It's going on 2 years now when 6,000 plus people came and volunteered to collect signatures on a petition to end the HST. And they had great support from the fact that 85% of the people in every poll done at the time suggested or said they were opposed to the HST. Now we get asked quite often as we travel the province in this particular round, it's going on a long time, as to how it is they don't see any ads or any advertising from the Fight HST Society. course, the government has changed the rules. There are no limits on spending. So if you had the money, you could certainly advertise as much as you willed it. We each get $250,000, our side, and the other side, the smart tax side, the business group. And we each get $250,000 to spend. And that doesn't go very far when it comes to advertising, particularly television advertising. So we haven't been able to do any of that so far. Hopefully we will a little later on. But you've no doubt seen all those swanky, very expensive ads from the Smart Tax Group, the business group, and I'm sure those ads are costing many thousands of dollars, and I presume before it's all over, they'll be spending millions. You've also seen the ads from the government side. Now, I can understand why the Smart Tax Group, the business group, is advertising as they are. It certainly is to their benefit to see the HST remaining. It pays a lot of money to the business sector. But we also see a lot of stickman ads from the government. And they've committed $5 million to that particular program alone. So there's a lot of money being spent. Basically, for us, it's volunteers. We travel the province. We don't get anything for it. We don't charge anything. That's fine. We don't want anything. And we have a lot of volunteers helping us, and that's how we'll win the fight. Wednesday was a bit of a day for us to celebrate, because I think it was a day when the government finally realized that the untruths we've been told for several years were catching up to them. The tax was far too much for families, for seniors, for people on low or lower income or middle income. And we also recognized that what they were offering, $175 to each senior of low income or to lower income or to children, was, we call it a bit of a bribe, because they're really telling us that if you vote for this, we'll pay you the money. And according to the Elections Act, that's not legal. But however, that's again a part of the promise. And a part of the promise as well is that they will reduce the tax from the 12% to 10% over the next 3 years. Now, in order to collect the same amount from the tax as they would under the PSD, the same amount, they would have to reduce it to about 8 or 8.5%. But they've reduced it to 10%. So they're going to have some extra money for themselves as well as for the corporate sector. Now, they've also said that the tax was revenue neutral. That was one of the first statements made. We know now that it's not revenue neutral. It's a bit of a tax grab as well. As a matter of fact, they're going to take an extra $850 million in revenues from the tax. And they said it was going to create jobs. Well, we know as well that the unemployment rate in BC has gone up since the tax was first introduced. They said it was going to create economic growth. That's not happening. So I can see, and we can all see, where the government has a problem with it. Now, it doesn't bother me if the small business sector benefits by this. I guess if the business sector benefits by it, as long as it's not at the expense of the consumer, solely at the expense of the consumer. And that's what we're seeing. I think the business sector owes it too to participate in paying for the cost. They use the services, the roads, just as you and everyone else does. But I guess what bothers me more is that we might be paying back the tax paid to the exporter of raw logs, to the guy that sends the logs to China or to the United States instead of having them processed here, or to the cable company that has their employees working in another province, maybe another country like India. And it bothers me that the tax might be returned, will be returned if the HST is accepted by you, the people, to General Electric for creating run-of-the-river projects. That doesn't sit well with me, and I'm sure it doesn't sit well with you. And it bothers me that the government would allow a provincial jurisdiction, a social services or sales tax, to be transferred to the federal government, that they now become the one to charge the tax, that in fact it has become a federal tax as opposed to a provincial tax. And it bothers me that our government would buy into a tax that we know in Europe and elsewhere has created a great underground economy. A lot of people locally find now that they can deal with people that'll take the cash or that will accept the cash and then not charge the tax. I had a friend of mine who's in the fence business tell me that his business has dropped in half simply because everyone wants to pay cash and avoid having to pay the tax. Well, if they avoid having to pay the HST, they won't pay income tax either, because if they report that income, then obviously they get caught not having collected the tax. It bothers me that somehow as well we fail to see democracy as it ought to be. We send people to Victoria to represent us. And when the government found that 85% of the people were opposed, they should have acted immediately. But they said, no, the people are wrong, we're right, the tax is going ahead. Now we forced them to make some changes, but again, the changes are only promises. There's no guarantee that the government will still be there in 2 or 3 years. And there's no guarantee that there won't be some other disaster, heaven forbid, happen, which would cause them to say, no, sorry, we can't do it now. We need the money for this particular disaster or whatever it is that perhaps might be needing money at the time. They have totally ignored the voice of the people. And I guess if we allowed them to get away with it, if we simply said, okay, we give up, they waited long enough, we've now seen the tax in place, it's too late anyway, we won't do anything. If we allow them to go ahead, then the message to government, to this government and future governments might well be that if we do something, promise something during an election, and let it wait long enough, leave it out there long enough, the people will finally give up and we can go ahead anyway. So it's important for democracy as well that we vote down the HST, that we vote yes to extinguish the HST. This is not a good tax. It's a bad tax. It's a bad tax. It certainly has proven to be such in places like Europe particularly. We've seen the suffering in some of those countries where they've had so much a black market that in fact they're finding billions of dollars in losses, and they're finding that many people, in Greece for example, 3/4 of the people don't pay any tax anymore. It's all black market, it's all underground, it's all under the table. So we need to be aware of that. We need to avoid this. The tax will not create jobs. Quite the contrary, we've seen unemployment go up, and we can't afford to take a chance on this now. We need to continue as we have been. It worked in the past. We've prospered over the years. And why the change and why, in fact, the government is pushing ahead against the will of the people is something that we need to protest against. And that's what we've been doing and will continue to do. Folks, we need you to get out and tell your friends, your neighbors, your families, everyone in your community to vote yes to extinguish the HST, to get rid of the tax, and to go back to what it is we had. And if they feel that perhaps that needs to be changed, then they should consult the people before they do that. This is something that's so major, so important, that we can't just have some politicians or some party or leader decide that it's good for us. It's a people's decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Your timing was impeccable. We'll now have the presentation by the Smart Tax Alliance.
Good evening and thank you for coming. In less than 1 month's time, British Columbians are going to have a rare, I will say unique opportunity. we will be choosing our own sales tax system. And it's a simple choice. Do we want two separate sales tax systems at 12%? Or do we want one sales tax system at 10%? Now, it's an important decision for British Columbians. Now, my name is David Robertson, and I'm a tax partner with the accounting firm of Ernst & Young, and I am a tax specialist. I have been working with the GST, HST, and PST system for 15 years, day in, day out. I also want to introduce myself by telling you who I'm not. I'm not a politician, I'm not a member of any political party, and I'm not being paid by anyone to be here. I volunteered to be here to answer questions that you might have about HST and the old PST system. And I'm also here to correct many of the myths and misconceptions that have been spread about the HST. Now, the one thing we can all agree on is that no one liked how the HST was introduced. The politics were mishandled. But there's an old and very fitting saying, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We threw out Gordon Campbell. Let's not throw out the baby. On behalf of my fellow panelists, I want to thank you for taking the time to come here tonight to set politics aside and to take the time to learn the differences between the HST and the GST and PST system. Now, before turning over the mic to Sue, because really these forums were designed as to form a dialogue between yourselves and members of your local community, I am pleased to say that we're seeing that knowledge is in fact power. As more and more people learn the differences and the problems of having two separate sales tax systems, more and more people are agreeing that it's better to have one sales tax system at 10% as opposed to two sales tax systems at 12%. As Mr. Van der Zand pointed out, 2 years ago, 85% of people thought that having the HST was a bad thing. I'm pleased tonight that it's through these types of dialogues and forums to report that Global News tonight announced for the first time since the HST was introduced, more British Columbians favor retaining the HST than taking a step backwards and reverting back to two separate sales tax systems, the GST and the PST. Now, the last thing before I turn it over to Sue, I left my hotel room to come here tonight, and on the back of the door I found a sign, and I thought it was a sign. So I'll remind everyone, please vote no. Sue?
My name is Sue Porter. Guess we need that on. My name is Sue Porter, and I'm a certified general accountant and an associate partner with the KPMG office here in Kamloops. I feel strongly that people need to educate themselves regarding the HST, and I am hoping to assist with that tonight. I'm here to explain why we should move forward with the HST. I'm not going to talk about politics and how the tax came into being. I'm going to leave that debate to the politicians. I think it's fair to say that very few of us like to pay tax. But the truth is that that tax helps us pay for public services that British Columbians expect. Things like universal health care, schools, universities, and roads. Switching to a value-added tax instead of a retail sales tax is beneficial to consumers. The prior PST is an embedded cost in most of the goods and services we purchase. Just because we didn't see the PST on the receipt doesn't mean we didn't pay it. Businesses paid the PST and passed it right along to us as the consumer. What was even worse is that the PST is a cascading tax, which means that often the embedded PST was paid multiple times depending on the supply chain of the goods. Under the HST system, that's changed. Most businesses receive a full rebate on sales taxes paid on items they buy to make products and services. Businesses can pass on the HST rebate to you in the form of lower prices or use those savings to invest in new equipment, labor, or expansion, all of which generates economic growth. By implementing the HST system, the government is cutting the cost of doing business. Most businesses are happy with the change, as it has made their bookkeeping simpler and cheaper. Compliance with only one sales tax versus two has relieved a lot of administrative burden. Most of you are probably wondering how I can sit here and defend the HST. Because it's the right thing to do. The seniors, the poor, and with the new 10% rate for all families across the province, it's the right thing. One of the biggest myths about the HST is that it will hurt families, seniors, and low-income people the most. That argument is flawed. The government has indicated that part of the burden on low-income earners will be reduced with tax credits. For 1.1 million British Columbians, getting these rebate checks will actually leave them with a few $100s more each year. Another point in favor of the HST is it saves the government an awful lot of money, an estimated $35 million in administrative costs annually. There's also been an injection of $1.6 billion of federal funds into the BC economy to assist with the transition to HST. In summary, the choice that you face in a month is going to be a big one. It comes down to balancing the so-called savings you and your family are going to get by going back to the PST against the long-term economic benefits that staying with the HST will bring British Columbians in the years ahead. The HST taxes the growing part of our economy, and that's services, and will provide extra revenue to fund hospitals, schools, roads, and other important public services we all rely on. In short, the HST is good for the economy and it's good for jobs. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Judy Guichon and I run a cattle ranch south of Kamloops here. We are a cow-calf and yearling operation. I employ 4 full-time families as well as, at this time of year, about 3 seasonal employees. The agricultural community, and particularly ranching community, has had a tough few years since 2003 when BSE struck and we in the beef industry lost a great deal, all our export markets. We have suffered it's been tough, very, very tough. When the carbon tax came in our industry for agriculture, there's no way we can go without running our tractors. I have a 12-mile return trip to mail a letter. I haul 10,000 gallons of water a day at this time of year up a hill to the cattle. I have to burn fossil fuels to do that. So the carbon tax exacted an extra cost on us in agriculture. So we lobbied hard through the BC Agriculture Council for some relief. And the PST system, which we've dealt with for years, has been onerous. We had a list, we had a booklet, you had to look up the different things, batteries, milk filters, this huge list to see whether the items you purchased were or were not PST exempt. So often you just couldn't get around to doing it, and many, many dollars. In my own case, I just did not get the job done to get those dollars back. The GST, when it came in, it was very easy for me to do the paperwork, and now the HST is so simple.
Your 10 minutes is at an end.
Oh.
Would you like to round out your thought?
Okay, I'm now able, I do all my bookkeeping, and I'm able to get all my HST back in a very simple manner.
Thank you. We'll now turn it over for a 5-minute rebuttal from the Fight HST group.
Thank you. For 2 years now, the government has not told us the truth about the HST. In order to get anybody to buy into it, they've had to obfuscate and make things up and tell us things about the tax that it actually doesn't do. As Bill pointed out, when the Premier finally announced these cuts, these promised cuts to the HST, that was an admission that it did not create jobs, that it did not lower prices, that it did not stimulate the economy. And they're still not telling us the truth about it. This poll that they quoted by Global News is a joke. It's a total joke because the same question that they asked is the same thing that Mr. Robertson just said here, which is totally misleading. That the choice is between a 12% GST and PST or a 10% HST. But all of you people know that a 10% HST is applied to hundreds of other items and services that a PST was not applied to. So they're still taking $1.5 billion more of your money under the HST than they did under the PST. But they rely upon ignorance and stupidity, and they think that we're dumb in order to be able to advance this cause. Why can't they just tell the truth and say it's a 10% HST, but it's still much more expensive to the tune of tens of billions of dollars over the next 10 years than the old PST and GST? The reason they can't tell you that is because then you'll vote against it. Why would any government overtax you to the tune of billions of dollars and then say to you, but don't worry, we'll give you a check, we'll give you some of your money back? And who here believes that they're going to give you back everything that they just took? It's not going to happen. This is kindergarten economics. I'll tell you one thing, folks, it sure is not good tax policy. This is raw, naked politics. But I'll give you a little skill testing question here. During the leadership campaign of the BC Liberals, just recently, a couple months ago, they had a debate, and one of the candidates said, and this was on March 21st, just recently, one of the candidates said we should not be talking about a 1 to 2% cut to the HST because the people of BC would see that as being bribed with their own money. Now, if you guessed that that was Christy Clark, you get $175. That's your prize. Christy Clark said that. And here she is, 2 months later, offering you some of your money back so long as you give them just a little bit more than they took, so that they can give a check to the corporate sector. It's a little bit like going down to a car dealership and saying to the dealer, you know, I need a good economical car that's not too bad on gas, that's, you know, reasonably priced, isn't going to break me every month to afford. What have you got? And he takes you over to the biggest gas-guzzling SUV on the lot and says, I got this right here, this big gas guzzler. And you say, well, that's not what I wanted. He says, don't worry, don't worry. All that gas that it's going to gobble up, I'm going to give you a $175 check one time to offset the gasoline price of that. And you go, yeah, but then what about after that? What about the next tank of gas? Oh, well, you'll have a gas guzzler. Yeah, but I didn't want a gas guzzler. Don't worry, it gets better. I will send a check, a rebate check, to the favorite corporation of your choice if you buy this car. Well, yeah, but I want a reasonable, economical, you know, car that's not going to break me. Well, no, you can have a gas guzzler. Would you buy that car? Nobody would buy that car. I guess the only thing we can say about the ridiculous attempt, the naked political attempt by the Liberals to save this desperate, crappy, awful tax is that it has shifted the debate. We're no longer talking about whether or not the tax is a good tax or a bad tax. Both sides now admit the tax is bad. The question we're now talking about is how do you fix it? The government is saying you fix it by giving us all the money and letting us give a little bit back to you. We're saying you fix it by canceling the tax altogether and saving all your money and not sending any to Victoria and relying them on their promises of a tax cut 3 years from now after they've bled you dry for 3 years to then suddenly get whole on the tax. That's a no-brainer, folks. And all you need to do is know the facts about the situation to make your decision. But if we listen to misleading comments by Mr. Roberts that it's between a 12% tax and a 10% tax, well, I would have voted yes in that poll. That's ridiculous. It's a no-brainer, folks. The HST, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us here in British Columbia. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to hold a government to account in between election. It's never happened before. It's never happened in Canada before. If we vote to give them their tax, we are voting to tell them to lie to us. To lie to us in the next election and wait us out until we've somehow been distracted or given up on it and let them have their way.
Your
and we will get more lying.
Come to an end.
We will get more lying, not less. Vote yes to extinguish the HST, save your government, save your province, save your democracy, and save your money. Thank you.
will open the floor to the Smart Tax Alliance for a 5-minute rebuttal.
I thought we were here to talk about the difference between HST and PST, not to debate politics and campaign, because the choice that British Columbians are facing is a choice. Do we want to go back to 2 sales taxes, the GST and the PST, or do we want just the HST? Now, the biggest risk we have here is throwing the baby out with the bathwater if you want to deal with this through politics. The Fight HST folks, Mr. Delaney, you want to throw out the bathwater, the baby, the bathtub, maybe even the whole bathroom. You might even want to dynamite the house. We have to get past the politics. It's not. It's a choice over what tax do you want. The question is, are you in favor of extinguishing the HST and restoring the PST and the GST? Now, this is about jobs. This is about low-income individuals. And what's interesting is if I go to Mr. Delaney's site, he specifically says this is one of the myths about the liberals' myths, and I'm saying I'm not here for politics, but he says, you may hate the HST, but the alternatives are worse. And they say that's simply not true. It's designed to make British Columbians think that the debate is either HST or PST. It is not. And I'm going, no, that's the question. The question is, are you in favor of the HST or are you in favor of PST and GST? GST and PST at 12% or HST at 10%. Now, in addition, if you go to Mr. Delaney's website, he also specifically says the PST may not be the best tax. So let's return the PST and then begin the process of determining what is the best tax for British Columbia. Well, I'm saying we're already at a point where we have HST. If Mr. Delaney has a better tax system, let's not do a 2-step to do a 1-step process. Let's go directly to that better sales tax. It's going to be very time-consuming, expensive, and confusing to go back to an old, antiquated PST system, to hire 300 new auditors, to spend the time and expense to go back to an old system. I understand that people are mad at the government, but we're members of your community. And in particular, these 2 women, these 2 ladies are members of your community. And they've come out here tonight to talk to you about the difference between HST and PST, because that's the decision that we're facing.
If I could just quickly too explain some personal experiences. Right after the HST came in July, I was able to go and I traded in, or I replaced 2 of my 1977 1-ton pickups that we had kept going for many, many years, because that's the state of our industry. You have to keep them going. And I bought a 2006 because I could get the PST back. Before July 1st last year, I couldn't have done that. I will fill out my form for the first 4 months this year. I'll get $11,000 back. That provides me cash flow for another month. I had to replace my big truck, my Western Star. Without the PST, I couldn't have done that, and I would have had to lay the truck driver off. So I've been able to buy a new Peterbilt just last month and keep that truck on the road. It's not just about big business. It's every small business and all the employees that we hire. And we have to pay for services. We have choice. We can either tax consumption or tax labor. Personally, I like the idea of taxing consumption because we have some choices. We can maybe go without a haircut now and again, but we all need to work.
In addition, let's look at, there's a practical real-life example. Here in Kamloops, New Tech Fire and Safety in Kamloops, as a consequence of the HST, their refunds equal 2 new staff members and lower prices on most of their products. Downs Construction in Victoria calculated their HST savings, and they gave each of their 38 employees a raise. Delta-based IMSFS, International Marine Flotation Systems, they've hired 11 employees thanks to the HST. This is about, Mr. Van der Zam and Mr. Delaney say this is a tax break for big business. That's a myth. He talked about raw logs, he talked about mining, he talked about big corporations. Here's a fact. Big corporations, mining sectors received an exemption from
Your
PST
5 minutes is at an end.
on production machinery and equipment. This is a tax break that was aimed at small and medium-sized businesses.
Thank you, both sides, and thank you very much from the audience for respecting both points of view, which leads us to our next section. Kamloops is known for many things: fantastic athletics, wonderful weather, not today, but mostly wonderful weather. We're also known for caring about our community and the issues that are presented to us. We care about everything, be it elections, parkades, or backyard chickens. That's why you're here today. But Kamloops is also known for being friendly and respectful, and that's what we expect from you today. So, in our next section, we're going to entertain questions from the audience. So we have the forms in the back. Please put your hand up, those who have the forms. Okay. If you'd like to write down questions, they'll be brought forward, and some will be read. We also have 2 microphones that Wanda and Diane have. You can ask questions from the audience. Let me be very clear. Respect the questions, respect the speakers, and respect each other. More importantly, it's like Jeopardy. Only questions will be accepted. You can direct your question to one side or the other. That side will have the right to answer first, and then the other side will have a short answer for response. We're looking at between 1 and 3 minutes per response. So, ladies and gentlemen, your questions, please. You can write them down, or you can ask for a mic that can be brought to you. Wanda, this gentleman up front. Okay.
Yes, George Webb here. I've tried to keep a fairly open mind on this, but I'm still finding there's a lot of misinformation out there. And this would be for the Fair Tax Alliance, if you could answer this question here. This is from an article in the Financial Post from Jack Mintz, who I think was the architect of this whole HST program. And he was talking about, he definitely wants to keep it, but he said the best tax structure is one that minimizes economic costs while ensuring fairness. Now, I don't see a lot of fairness in the way this tax has come in there. And the reason is, and following up that about 4 paragraphs down, he said almost 90% of taxes saved by BC businesses on their inputs have benefited consumers with lower prices that have offset previously untaxed sales. I haven't seen anything, personally, that has dropped in price.
And what is your question?
Could you give me some examples of things? You mentioned a couple there, the people hiring and the women they're able to buy new things for business. I appreciate that, but I don't see any lowering of prices anywhere.
Let me deal with both of those. First of all, thank you for the question about fairness. Let me demonstrate fairness through an example, and this is why, you know, you hear the economists say we want to remove the tax on capital. Well, here's the example. If you take a school teacher and an independent trucker, they both earn $50,000 a year. So they're both paying the same amount of income tax because they earn $50,000 a year. But the trucker, in order to earn his living, has to buy a rig. That rig costs $100,000. Under the PST system, the government shows up before he's ever earned a penny and says, give me $7,000. Doesn't matter whether his business is successful or not. And under PST it says, and we want to charge a PST on your truck repairs and on your tires and on your cell phone bills. And so the trucker, because he needs a lot of stuff to go and earn a living, he pays a lot more tax, and he's paying it at the point in time where he's buying stuff to try and earn a living. HST is different. HST turns and says, don't tax me when I'm trying to earn a living. Either tax me once I've made my profit in the form of income tax, or tax me when I go to spend my money after I've earned my profit and for my personal consumption. Now compare the school teacher, because I'm certain some people will be saying, well, the school teacher buys supplies or a computer for their classroom. They don't get the tax back. They're not registered for GST, HST purposes. That's not true. Under the GST, HST system, there is a rebate provided to employees. If you have to buy equipment or supplies, or you're contractually obligated under your terms of your employment to buy things that you need to earn a living, you get a rebate of the HST that you pay on it. And the reason why economists like that, in the same way that people say, you know, income tax terrible because, you know, it gives you a disincentive to work. Well, PST is even worse because if you need stuff to buy to work, it taxes you at this point in time. This is why I'm saying this is a tax break for small business people. This is for the farmers, the contractors, the welders, it's the small business people. When Mr. Van der Zam and
your thought, please?
When Mr. Van der Zam and Mr. Delaney say it's large corporations, they have exemptions under the PST system.
Thank
They
you very
already
much.
had exemptions.
A rebuttal from the Fight the HST?
Yeah. So first of all, just as a point of clarification, teachers are terrific people and do a lot of things, but I don't know very many of them that buy computers for their classroom, just as a point of there. But Jack Mintz, the fellow that you quote in that survey, did a study early on for the government saying that the HST would create 130,000 jobs over the next 10 years. The independent panel, which was appointed by the government, said actually it's 24,000 jobs, which is within the margin of rounding errors, quite frankly, over a period of 10 years. But if you do the math on it, we'll be paying $24 billion more in taxes than we paid before over 10 years for 24,000 jobs. That's $1 million a job. So you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And the other thing too is, I've noticed the same thing you have. I've noticed prices not only have gone up, but they've gone up on things that aren't even HST-able, like groceries or gasoline or strata fees, because of indirect HST that impacts those things. So groceries have gone up 5% across the board at many grocery chains, and they say it's because the additional costs to have it trucked in, to have it all the serviced, warehoused, and everything else where there's additional costs. So we're seeing incidental HST increases as well. We all know that prices always go up. They almost never come down. Sometimes they do on a sale here or there, but it's just not happening. People are getting less for their money, not more. And it doesn't matter what all the economist surveys say, because those are theories. They're telling you a theory. They believe 90% of the input tax credits will be passed on to you in savings. That's an estimate and a theory, but we haven't seen it. 90%? And if that was true, where would the money be left over for businesses to invest in capital costs and equipment to stimulate the economy? They'd have 10% left, and after tax it would be 7%. You couldn't even hire a new employee with that. So it's ridiculous to say you can't have it both ways. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to remind, even when writing your questions, please form them in the form of questions and not comments. Okay, this was posed to the Tax Alliance side, so they'll begin the response. Is there opportunity for further reform? Why are we taxing children's sporting equipment? Example, sneakers.
I'm a tax purist. Now, Mr. Delaney says that it's ridiculous that they tax you and then they give money back to you. I don't get any money back. I don't earn at an income. I'm fortunate enough that I have an income that I don't receive the low-income credit. That credit is designed to compensate low-income people for the extra tax that they're paying. So really, it's coming from all of us to help that system. With respect to pardon me, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
The question is, and you've got a minute and a half left,
I know.
Is that opportunity for further reform? Why are we taxing children's sports
So let me
equipment?
give you the example with children's clothing. Now, if you think about it, why are we exempting children's clothing? My assistant is a single mom. She goes to Walmart and she buys jeans for her daughter, and she doesn't pay HST on her children's clothing, on the jeans. But I have partners who go to Holt Renfrew and spend $500 on a pair of jeans for their daughter, and they get the exemption. The reason for the low-income credit is the theory is tax everything, and then for my assistant, give her the HST credit back to compensate her for that tax. And in fact, under the HST system versus the PST system, that credit actually gets paid up front. The very first month that HST came in, British Columbians, 1.1 million British Columbians, received additional cash in the form of the BC HST credit to compensate them for the tax that they would be paying on goods and services. And let me be very clear, that HST credit is 3 times the size of the credit that was available under the old PST system.
Thank you. And the Fight the HST?
The problem with these politically motivated credits are that Mr. Robertson, a lawyer, probably earning a big 6-number figure, If he has 4 children, he's going to get money for each child under 18. They're going to send him a check. But if you're a senior and you're earning 40,000 maybe between the two of you, you don't get the check. So, you know, this is what happens with all these politically motivated credits. And in all of this, and I understand why Mr. Robertson and others are speaking on behalf of business, that's why they're here. But somehow in this whole process for the last 2 years, you, the consumers, are left out. Now suddenly there's a realization that you've been left out, that you're the ones that'll pay the bill, and there's a few compromises. Although they're only promises, perhaps at a later date you might get them if the government is still there and if something else doesn't happen.
Thank you, Mr. Van der Zam. This question is directed to Dave Robertson, and we will take one from the audience immediately following this. Mr. Robertson, why tax seniors and poor at all?
The problem with any form of sales tax, including PST, is you can't do an income test at the till. You have no idea when someone walks up to a cash register how much money they make. You don't have the ability to say this person only earns $20,000 and this person earns $200,000, so we apply the sales tax at the till on the person who makes $200,000. Now, Mr. Van der Zam, I need to correct a fact that you just said. Seniors who earn $40,000 or less will receive the $175 credit to compensate them for the HST that they've been paying since the start, since it's been introduced. So I just want to correct that fact. So, and when you say why tax seniors and why tax the poor, the only way that you can do an income test under any tax system is no one wants to volunteer and come up to a till and say, I only earn $20,000 a year. Or no one wants to disclose their income. So with any sales tax, PST, GST, and HST, you apply the tax at the time of the sale, and for those who can't afford it, because the government knows what your income is, they give you the credit back. So that's why low-income individuals are receiving the federal GST credit, they're receiving a carbon tax credit, and they're also receiving the BC HST credit, which, as we've said, one of the myths is that low-income people are worse off under HST. One of the reasons I'm here is because that myth bothers me. I live downtown.
Please conclude your thought.
I live downtown in Vancouver, next to the downtown east side, and I walk past some of the poorest people in our province. And when people kept saying they're worse off under HST, we've got to go back to PST, I knew that that $230 to them every year was actually very important.
Thank you. A question from the crowd. Do we have someone waiting? We have a couple people. Thank you. Go ahead.
Question to Mr. Roberts. Over the last year...
Sorry. Please speak into the mic.
Sorry. Question to Mr. Roberts. Over the last year, my sons and myself have purchased 3 cars privately. And in the old system, when it was PHT and GST, we only paid 1 tax on the car when you bought it privately. Now with the HST, we pay 2 taxes, and I'm out of pocket and my sons to the sum of about $1,500. How can you say that is fair?
This is with respect to used motor vehicles that
Yes,
you're
sir.
buying privately, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so under the GST system, because let me be very clear, GST and HST are exactly the same tax. They're simply at a different rate. It's exactly the same tax. Now, with respect to the tax you're talking about, the fairness is the fairness is this. If you bought a used car from a dealer, you had to pay the tax.
Yes, I know that.
If you bought it from an individual, you didn't.
Yes.
Now what that created was an underground economy with people called curbers. And what the curbers were dealers who were actually acting like they were selling used that they were private sales when in fact they weren't. The tax you're dealing with, just to be clear, is not in fact HST. It's a tax that's still imposed under the, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the PST tax. It's under the Social Service Tax Act.
But this is a tax I wouldn't have had to pay before.
No, you would have been paying, if you go to register, when you went to register a car, you paid the 7% PST. What you didn't pay was the federal GST.
I know that, yeah.
Okay, so you're still not actually paying HST on it. To be very clear, what they did was they increased the PST rate to 12%.
Yeah,
And
but I'm paying an awful lot more than I should be paying on a used car, on a private one.
But is there a car, if there was a car dealer in the room, they would say that's only fair, because if you bought the car from me, you'd have to charge you 12%.
Well, the reason I bought it privately was
so
to save money. Sorry.
The question has been asked.
No, you can absolutely sell cars privately. The tax always gets collected at the time of registration.
Thank you.
The name of the tax is the TDP. It's called the Tax on Domestic Property, and it is a 100% provincial tax now. So the extra 5%, which is not GST, actually goes to the provincial government. So it's a tax grab, a total tax grab. And it's interesting because the HST is a 100% federal tax. It is administered by Ottawa. It is collected by Ottawa. It's a little bit like our gasoline tax. We send our money there, and they send it back to us. They do the calculation of what we send, and then they send it back. So if you think we're going to get back what we sent them, take a look at your roads. But having said that, there is nothing preventing a government in the future in British Columbia from reintroducing a PST or a TDP on top of the HST. So there will be two provincial sales taxes, theoretically, in British Columbia. The HST, the provincial portion of the HST, which we'll come back to, and the TDP, which is a tax on domestic property and is administered solely by British Columbia. So just in case you think that the tax will be 10% or 12%, just wait until somebody gets in a bind and introduces a new PST or a TDP at 3% on top of what you're already paying. There's nothing in law to prevent it.
Thank you. The next question is to the Smart Tax Alliance. What guarantee do we get that the government will not raise the tax to from 10 to 20, etc., years up the road?
I love this question, because you've heard Mr. Delaney and Mr. Van der Zam say, look what happened in Europe. Well, there's this fundamental difference between the design of the Canadian GST system and the European VAT system. In Europe, it's included in the price. I hear a number of people say, I really like that, because then I go to the till and I know exactly what I'm paying. I know I don't have to worry about calculating this additional tax. In Canada, the Federal Department of Finance said, we're going to make the tax extra. It's going to be on top of the price. And here's the reason why. Because it's going to be really tough for a government to raise the rate. Because the reason you hate this tax is because every time you buy your cup of coffee or every time you pass a till, you know exactly that you're paying tax. The reason why I'm not concerned that the same thing that Mr. Van der Zam says and Mr. Delaney says, the price, you know, they'll increase the rate to 20%, and they look at Europe and they look at Greece, well, I have two comments. Would PST help Greece? And second, let's come close to home. GST was introduced in Canada at a rate of 7%. It's a value-added tax. It was introduced in 1991. It's gone up by -2%. It's dropped. And what did we see in BC? HST came in at 7% provincial component, total 12, and it's already dropped to 10. The reason why, the fact that you don't like the tax, is the control on the government. They will not want to raise the rate, because if they raise the rate, they will pay a political price for it.
Thank you. Your rebuttal?
Mr. Chrétien, it was some time back, during an election said, we'll totally eliminate the GST. He had the red book, and he said, we'll totally eliminate the GST. He was elected. You know what happened? The GST stayed exactly where it was. Mr. Harper comes along and reduces the GST to 5%. And when he did that, he said, it's our objective is to totally eliminate, you'll recall him saying that, the GST. Well, now It's tied into what's called the HST. Do you think they're going to eliminate the GST? Not a chance. Now in Europe, they started the VAT or HST at 6 and 7%. And then, as happens so often with taxes, they go up, not down. It went up to 21%, and in some countries, 25%. It became so bad, and the need for money was so great, they even put it on groceries in places like Denmark and Sweden. It's on everything. In Hungary, it's on practically everything. It became such an embarrassment for the politicians in Europe that they decided to hide it in the price of goods. Now, of course, it'll never change. So if you think Mr. Robertson is right and that, in fact, it'll be held at what it is today, just look at what happened in Nova Scotia only a few months ago. It went from 13% to 15%. It'll go up, folks. Better we stop it right now. There's no stopping it after. We've got a chance like we've never had it before. This is our opportunity. Stop the HST. Extinguish the HST.
Thank you. Question from the crowd to the Smart Tax Alliance. Why not keep the HST but bring back all the PST exceptions?
Once again, I'm going to come back to the example that I gave you with respect to children's clothing, because it means that people who are wealthy also get those exemptions. And if I have my druthers, there are 3 points in time where a government can tax you. Government can tax you when you're investing your money. That's the trucker who's, buying the capital good, buying the rig so he can go to work. They can tax you once you've just earned your money. That's income tax. Or they can tax you when you go to spend your money. And if I get to choose out of those 3, I want to be taxed when I go to spend my money, and here's why. I've explained why it's not fair to tax people when they're when they're buying stuff to earn their money. But I also don't like taxing people when they've just earned it, the income tax. Because here's the thing, if they take the money right away, but there's 3 things that you could do with that money. You could save it for your retirement, you can use it to pay down your debt and your mortgage on your house, or you can go and spend it. And the benefit with a consumption tax and a value-added tax like the GST, HST, is that in a perfect world, I would sit down and say, I want to see them drop the lowest marginal tax rates, personal marginal tax rates, to take more and more people in British Columbia off of the income tax rolls so that they have more money in their pocket, and then you get to decide if you're going to be taxed. If you take your money and you're responsible and say, I'm going to save it for my retirement, I'm going to pay down my debt, you're not going to pay any sales tax. But when it comes to, if the only time you will be taxed is if you go to consume, if you go to buy something.
Please conclude your thought.
So accordingly, I sit down and I say, if you want to understand why the economists and the tax lawyers and everyone else sits down, that's the simplest way of putting it. Don't tax me when I've earned my money. Tax me when I go to spend my money.
Thank you. Rebuttal?
Well, one of the biggest problems with the HST is that Ottawa now controls the tax. Going back to the PST, with whatever difficulties it has, gives full control to BC. I'll give you an example. Under the CITCA agreement, which is what BC signed to create the HST with Ottawa, we have to give them 4 months' notice if we want to exempt an item. 4 months' notice, and Ottawa has 2 months to reply as to whether they agree or not. Because it's a 100% federal tax, they essentially have a veto. So we do not control our taxes after we give it to the HST to Ottawa. Now, granted, Ottawa will probably try to cooperate in these cases, but they have the option to not. And we don't know that this government will be in place in Ottawa. There could be another one, and so on and so forth. So why would we give that up? Right now, we can go into our legislature, and in 3 days, we can create an exemption and pass the bill, and it's done. Why would we give up our provincial sovereignty to Ottawa? Quebec actually has a harmonized sales tax already. It's called the Quebec sales tax. It's a single form. It includes the GST. Quebec collects it and sends a check to Ottawa. So they did it the right way if you're going to do it at all. But here we've given away our sovereignty to Ottawa. And everything in that agreement says that we must consult with them for any changes to this tax, and then the bureaucrats in Ottawa will have to recalculate what the change in payment structure will be to us. It'll take months. In Europe, it's so cumbersome, it takes 8 years to get a change. France wanted the restaurant rate lowered because the HST there was killing restaurants. It took them 8 years lobbying Brussels to get it done. Here, how long will it take if the government doesn't want to make the change? How long will we play that game? Conferences for 2 and 3 years to get changes? It's silly. There's no point in doing it. Let's keep control of our own tax.
Just a quick add-on here.
Very quick.
When you pay the HST, you pay it with money on which you already paid income tax. So if you're going to pay $400 extra per year in HST, you better get out and earn $600 because you've got to pay income tax on the money before you can pay the HST with it.
Thank you. We'll take a question from the crowd.
First, I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. I think it's a really important dialogue to open about how we adequately fund our social programs, and I think it's a really important conversation for us to have. Well, my question is for the new tax alliance. Well, consumption taxes might not be my preferred form of taxation. We are really talking about different forms of consumption taxes. And I've been reading a lot about this value-added sales tax versus compounding sales tax. And I'm wondering what you would say to the argument that although the HST is a value-added sales tax, that savings isn't being passed on to the consumer, but is instead being kept by businesses.
The key with, if you think about this, what the government's doing to business is saying, you're getting this, you're getting your HST credit back, and let me be clear, this is to small and medium-sized businesses. Now there's two things that are going to happen. Either business is going to go and do what Judy did, which is she's going to go buy new equipment so that she can keep her farmhand working. Or alternatively, she can pocket it. But to pocket it from her corporation, she's first going to have to pay corporate income tax on it. So we're going to claw that back. And then it's going to be paid out of that corporation to her as a dividend, and we're going to tax it in her hands personally. And then if she takes it and goes and spends it, we're going to tax her again in the form of the consumption tax. So one of the reasons why I prefer, I sit down and I say, what tax do I want to see cut? I want to see personal income tax cut. Because exactly for your concern, everyone says businesses aren't passing it along. Well, we have examples where businesses are passing it along. And certainly I'm not going to argue that, I'm not going to sit here and say all businesses are passing on their savings. But I will turn and say the reason why cutting income tax is my preferred way of getting money into people's hands is because if the government cuts your personal income tax rate, paycheck after paycheck, you see those extra dollars go directly into your pocket. The other alternative would be for the government to do what they've chosen to do in this circumstance, which is to say we're going to cut the check directly to those people who need it most. Seniors and families is what they've they've chosen. So with respect to one of the concerns that I sit down is if you look at whether you go tax included with the HST or tax extra, if it's tax extra, it means if the price goes up, or pardon me, if the tax rate goes up, it gets passed on to the consumer. If it goes down, it automatically gets passed on to the consumer in the lower rate.
Thank you very much.
If it's included, it's not.
Rebuttal?
Yeah, well, I guess if I was a lawyer or an accountant earning a couple $100,000 a year, I'd certainly appreciate an income tax cut before a consumption cut as well, wouldn't I? When you're earning 40 or 50 grand, it's a whole different story. The idea of compounding the tax within the tax structure or system is an interesting concept because it doesn't have to be that way. And David gave a good example of Judy's situation. Judy's a farmer. Well, I'm a farmer too. I've got a Christmas tree farm in Barrier, and I used to have a PST exemption number. I never paid PST. So I don't know why Judy loves the HST so much because she didn't pay PST either. All you had to use was your farm exemption number. And the same thing with manufacturers. You don't have to have a cumbersome HST system where 6 or 7 different people in the supply chain all recalculate the same tax and have their accountants do the same work and recalculate the same number until it finally goes down to a consumer who pays it, and then everybody puts in rebate checks or input tax credits to the government with a huge bureaucracy to send checks out all the time. That's ridiculous. It's the most cumbersome, stupid system ever created. Just give everybody an exemption number if they're a business and say to them, quote your business number, and we won't charge you the tax. It'll be charged one place at the consumer, and you can give that to the government. Then you don't have to cash flow it. In some cases, people have to cash flow this tax for the government until they get paid, and on and on. So it's a silly system. It doesn't work at all. They try to tell you it's more efficient. It's totally less efficient. And we did a little bit of research. Well, why did they do it that way? And it turns out that the government in France, when they came up with it, decided to do this so that everybody had skin in the game and were co-opted as tax collectors on behalf of the government so they could go out and make sure that they'd get the tax collected. If you just give everybody an exemption number, you don't have to go through this mess. And that's what we used to do with farmers and manufacturers. We never paid it.
Thank you very much. This is going to be one of our 2 last questions as we conclude at 9, and we still have to do conclusions. And this is to Mr. Van der Zan. With the reduced paperwork and red tape under the HST, what do you say to those who would face renewed bureaucratic struggles if we went back to the GST-PST?
Well, I guess we've been doing it for 50 years. And it hasn't been that much of a problem, and our province, for the most part, during the last 50 years, has prospered and grown. And the paperwork that they're talking about, I'm sure that if someone has a cash register, it's a computer change, it happens very quickly, it's not a big deal. The business group is trying to make a big deal out of this, and I can understand why. They've got a lot at stake here. But folks, it's not that big a deal.
Rebuttal?
Do you want to explain how big a deal it was to switch over?
Oh, it is a big deal because sorry, thank you. The list was not simple, and it was outdated. Things that were no longer used in our industry had been there for 50 years, as you've said, but things that were now used hadn't made it onto the list. And PST on vehicles, I could not claim back. So my 1977 1-tons, I kept running until I could get a 2006 one after the HST came in, because I could not reclaim anything on vehicles.
In addition to that, I believe the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Just because we've done it for 50 years doesn't mean it's the right system. Let's be very clear. We were one of the only jurisdictions in all of the Western world to impose 2 forms of sales tax on our population and our businesses. With the HST, like I said, your choice is we've got 2 different sales taxes at 12% or 1 sales tax at 10%.
So with 5 minutes to go, I'm going to ask each group some final thoughts from our presenters in reverse order of how we started. I invite Smart Tax Alliance to give us a 1 to 3 minute wrap up, followed by Fight the HST. Go ahead.
What you've seen today is a conflict between 2 visions of British Columbia, and I hope that's become very clear. Fight HST is offering a very dark, paranoid vision of British Columbia. Everyone's going to rip you off. The government's not going to give you any tax break. The rates are going to go up. Listening to them, you'd think there's no such thing as competition. You would think there's no such thing as public opinion. I want to make it very clear. We've got a choice. It's a really simple choice. The choice is, do you want to retain the HST, a single tax at 10%, or do you want to go back to an old antiquated sales tax and have 2 forms of sales tax, 2 separate tax administrations, and to pay for both of those tax administrations and at a rate of 12%? I think the answer to that is very straightforward. I think if I ask in this room, who wants smaller government, who wants a simplified tax code, who thinks the tax system should be simplified, well, guess what? We just got rid of the PST. we got rid of an antiquated old tax system. It's much simpler to have one sales tax at 10% as opposed to two sales taxes at 12%. That is your choice in the referendum. I would encourage you to vote no to extinguishing the HST.
Thank you. Fight the HST. Your conclusion, please.
Well, you've heard it again. It's a choice between 12% and 10%. The 10%, first of all, is only a promise. And frankly, the government doesn't have that great a record of keeping its promises. But aside from that, the 10% is applied to hundreds of additional items and services that previously were exempt from the tax. So you can't compare. We are a Western province, and the HST is in effect in the East, and one's gone after the other, I grant you that, and obviously the Maritimes because of great pressure from the federal government. But the provinces in this country that have the lowest unemployment rate right now and that have the greatest amount of economic activity are not the HST provinces. It's Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Now, we live in a resource province, so it's not really correct, I guess, to compare us with Ontario. We ship our resources to the USA, to Asia, to Europe, to other countries. And I'm sure that when the copper or when the lumber or whatever it is, the aluminum from Kitimat, you name it, gets shipped to another country, the price that they paid perhaps by way of PST on whatever it is they purchase is included in the selling price. And they're still doing okay. We're doing very well. Kitimat, I understand, will be expanding because the aluminum business is pretty good right now. But now, and so it's the people where it's exported to in China or in the US or Europe that are paying the tax perhaps. But now we're going to change all of that. We're not going to charge those people in the US or China or elsewhere in Asia or Europe. We're going to charge you, the BC consumer. You're going to be paying it. You're paying the tax. This is a resource province. Yeah, we do manufacture, and hopefully we'll manufacture more still. But most of the business we do in this province is export of our resources. So if the other people in other countries pay towards this expense, great, that's good. It's at least we're getting some return for the resources that belong to you, the people. And they want you to start paying that tax. The HST is wrong. You have a chance to change all of that. You have a chance to hold the government to account. You can vote when you get that referendum ballot sent to you. Vote yes to extinguish the HST. It's a democratic process such as we've never had it before. Let's use it. This is our chance. Get rid of the HST.
Thank you. Democratic communities are based on participation, so I would like to thank you all for joining us on this rainy evening while a hockey game proceeds to participate, to learn more, and to be a part of the system. Thank you for coming out. We encourage you to follow the discussions at www.hstpublicforums.ca. There you can find links to both Facebook and Twitter. Remember to vote in the HST referendum. Watch for your ballots in the mail starting on June 13th. Thank you so much for a very safe environment for a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Super job. Best yet. Thank you.